the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand and baseball in the summer. Someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer. Baseball in the summer.
Welcome to the Brock v. Mac Legendary Rivals podcast, and that smiling youthful face over there is a name that's come up on multiple podcasts. Chris Peters, you son of a gun. Why don't you tell us what you're up to or not up to these days? Because I just feel that the abuse is going to start and never stop when people hear what you're up to these days.
Oh, man. Well, hey, Mike. I just want to say hello.
Yeah.
How you doing, buddy? I'm so glad to be here again. I'm so glad to be here again, and we're doing this again. And I never got a chance. First of all, to kind of say, really appreciate you guys. You putting this together, this podcasting, man. It's been amazing. I've been just crushing every episode and just picking up on so many things that I guess I kind of forgot. People just over time forget about it. And you see these faces and you're like, wow, these stories and all the guys, especially some of the guys that I shared the infield with and the couches in our place and all that stuff. So it's been so amazing. So I just want to thank you for doing this. But yeah, man, I just, you know what? Mike, I live in Florida now. I live in Jupiter, Florida now. And I've been living here for 3 years. I did 21 years on the job. I was a fireman in London, actually, London, Ontario. And I did 21 years there. And, I kind of reached a point in my life and in my career with my family. I just, it just wasn't, it wasn't doing it for me. And maybe we can get into it later. We can talk about it. I shouldn't say it wasn't doing it for me, but I just felt like I had done everything and there was everything to sort of do. I sort of reached my limit of where I was going to go in the career. And, honestly, I kind of felt, I don't want to say I was feeling like I was on borrowed time, but I just wanted to make sure that I was like kind of ahead of the game. And, and again, we'll get into this later. Like when Brad Reeson, of course, who we talked about, when he passed away, that was a real moment for me that I was like, you know what, I didn't want to use that as a catalyst, but there was just always something kind of in the back of my mind that I was like, you know what, this job that I'm in is dangerous, yes, but with everything else that comes with it, with the chemicals and the just all of it, the stress, the chemicals, the danger, the basement fires, all that stuff. I just kind of really wanted to think like I needed an exit strategy. And luckily, we had bought a place here in Florida. It was going to be our winter home. We were going to be snowbirds and all that, and finally, we just kind of pulled the pin on it in 2021, I think. And so now I'm down here in Jupiter, Florida. I just don't feel bad for me at all. I just actually came in from the ocean. I was just catching some waves, and I kind of got that, that glow going on right now, Mike. I don't want to just rub it in a bit. But anyways, man, yeah, so I'm just down here just kind of doing my thing. And I'm married. I got 2 young kids. My wife and I homeschool our kids, so I'm here just basically being an educator, part-time surfer, part-time this guy and everything. So yeah, man. So that's it. And we can get into more, but
I am
that's the rundown.
Very proud to announce Chris's new alternate career. It's called a BB&B, which is the Brock Baseball Bed and Breakfast in Jupiter, Florida. So any alumni who want to travel down to Florida, just get Pete's a ring, and he'll be happy to.
Michael, side note on that, and I'm not going to pump my own stats here or plug anything, but I my wife and I do actually run an Airbnb down here in Jupiter. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, let me know. I'll give you the Brock discount, which means I'll probably just charge you double. And maybe for the coaches, I'll charge them double. Everyone else is cool. We'll just do that. But
Well, you need damage insurance if Larry and Daryl come down, because we'll talk about holes in drywall.
yeah, they still owe me on that, so I'll just double that too. So
Well, why don't we get started? Because I think most people know that, you're one of the Oshawa guys. And
Yep.
Oshawa comes with its own stories because of exposure to Eastdale, Brad Reeson, Sam Dempster. So why don't we start with, how you got into sports, playing baseball, and a little bit of what life was like in the grand old schwa, or the dirty schwa, as we like to call it.
yeah, no, like just one of the things is like one of the key moments I remember. Every child of the '80s, sometimes we have that. My parents got divorced when I was young, so for me it was always mom for 5 days, dad at dad's place for 2, and my dad was always into sports, as you know, and then he was a big hockey guy, he was a big baseball guy, so everything pretty much revolved around sports on the weekend. For Friday, Saturday, Sunday was all sports and watching hockey and baseball and all that. And I really took a liking to that show, This Week in Baseball. I remember watching that and just watching the highlights, and I was always fascinated by these guys. And even at such a young age, I was just kind of fascinated by their athleticism and all that. And of course, the Jays were there, and I think Grooch had mentioned right in the wheelhouse time of them becoming a team and becoming good, right? And you had the big three in the outfield. So my dad always encouraged me to get into sports. Baseball was a thing that I really enjoyed playing with my friends, just, in the schoolyard and all that. And I found a knack for it. I was really good. And believe it or not, the only thing I ever really cared about when I was playing baseball at that young age was I just wanted to have a uniform. I just wanted to wear a uniform that was like everyone else and everything else. So I ended up playing, North Oshawa Park, which was just like a park league, house league or whatever. But when I got that jersey, man, I just felt like I was just right on top of the world. And so it just kind of started there. And again, being a child of on the weekends with my dad, everything was just Dad, I need pop-ups. I need just hit me pop-ups or whatever. So we'd go out on the street for hours and he'd just whack a tennis ball in the air, and I just work on pop-ups and throwing and all that stuff. And he didn't know anything about baseball, but he just was willing to put the time in for me. So it just kind of slowly escalated from there. And then when I found out there was a league in Oshawa, which was, the Legionnaires, then I wanted it even more because, again, they had these cool uniforms and they had belts. I was like, if I can get a belt, then I'll be like those guys I see on TV, just so excited. So that's how I ended up. And I think I ended up playing there when I was 7 or 8 or whatever. It was rec ball, and you get to travel to Peterborough and all that. And you just kind of felt like it was wow, man, I made it. So that's basically it. Nothing special, but yeah, it was good.
Yeah, and there would have been a core of great players in your age group. Definitely Brad Reeson would have played. You would have played all the way through. David Hatch all the way through. Hans Schnell at a certain point was maybe 1 year younger.
Yeah, Kevin Solomon,
yeah.
Stephen Drews, David, like you said, David Hatch, Jeremy Campbell, Brad. Those Brad and those guys, they were older. They was a year older, and the guys you mentioned earlier, they was a year younger. So it's kind of an in betweener.
Yeah, I don't remember a whole bunch of people exactly your age. It's a kind of a funny thing. But it was interesting always being that sandwich person. I was the same. Yeah. Tell me about when you, who your first coaches were and what your first exposure in the Legionnaire program was like.
Yeah. So again, when I got to the Legionnaires, I was a kid that was younger. So I was like you said, it was a good description. I was a sandwich kid. So I never got the full playing time because the kids older than me, like the Brads and the Sullys and those kids, they, that was their spot to have. So I was always the kind of guy that was learning and just kind of I was the filling guy. So that's basically what it was. I'd come off the bench and I get a couple hits or whatever like that. So again, all I wanted to do was make that team. But, Mike, the thing was that I think made me a good teammate because I did have that bench time. I didn't mind sitting on the bench. I wasn't one of these kids that like, oh, I have to play today or whatever like that. I just enjoyed the atmosphere. I enjoyed the guys. I enjoyed the coaches. I enjoyed just the feeling of being on the field, and again, going back to it, I enjoyed the uniform. I thought it was so cool, right? So, yeah, when you asked me who the coaches were, was it Bob Solomon, Doug Stone, all these, my dad was there, Lamont Brown, Sean Brown's dad, parent volunteers, basically, guys who used to wear just like what my dad did. My dad, Lamont Brown, used to wear jeans and a jersey. So that was a bad look. But anyways, just everyone had so much respect for volunteering their time, right? But they didn't really have to do much coaching because I don't know, we were a special group of kids that just thrived on baseball. We just kind of caught that fever at a weird time. So yeah, it was just, like I said, I was just an in-betweener kid, and I was just happy to be there, man, more than anything,
I wonder if I'll get banned from Oshawa if I say this, but somehow jeans and a jersey makes sense in the Schwa.
Looking back, for sure.
As would be, instead of playing the national anthem, they play a little "Pour Some Sugar on Me" by Def Leppard to be perfect.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So that leads us to, one of the great things, where I think you probably took that next step from a guy that was learning is you went to Eastdale High School and played high school baseball for Sam Dempster. Tell me a bit about what that was like, because we haven't, we've had, kind of a unique situation. This sounds so classic, Sammy, to a certain extent, where McMaster played them in an exhibition game and they had 8 players, and the leadoff hitter for Durham College went and bunted down the third baseline because Mac didn't have a third baseman, which was, Billy Newton, who was a catcher I threw to. He was a teammate of mine at one point, gave him the old, the next guy wore one in the ear because, Sam carried himself with a lot of confidence. And, occasionally when you were on the other team, you just really wanted to beat the guy. But what was it like playing for Sam? Because I know him a lot off the field, and he is one of the true lovers of baseball and an absolute pioneer and legend in Canada for everything that he's done for the sport.
So again, luckily, being that kid that was in between, I had followed all these guys up. Like, and they were going into grade 9, and they were going to play for this program at Eastdale, which is, basically the mecca of baseball back then. And this guy named Sam Dempster, and Sam Dempster was a scout with the Yankees, and he was like a mythical dude. Like, he was just like a mythical guy. He lived in Whitby. He didn't live in Oshawa, so it wasn't like everyone knew him around town, like, like how people are in Oshawa, right? So again, all I wanted to do was just make that team. And baseball was so big at the time that they actually had 2 teams. They had a senior team. No, I'm sorry, they had 3 teams. They had a senior team, they had a JV1 and a JV2 team. I didn't care whatever. So if you were grade 9, there was no question that you were going to play on JV2. No question. Didn't matter how good you were, because a guy like Sam Dempster wanted you to, he taught you how to play the right way, not just in fundamentals, but Sammy taught you the attitude of like, this is the way it's going to be. He was looking back on it, like, he really respected it, but he was the guy, like, you couldn't have the long hair, no earrings, nothing like that. And again, you're in the 90s, a time when all that stuff was really rocking, especially in Oshawa, which likely probably still is. So he was a guy that that program like mentored you until you were in grade 11. Like, you were not going to play on that senior team until you were in grade 11, sometimes grade 12. So it was a definite program of like a lot of discipline. You weren't scared of the man, but he was just it was a good, very, very good learning program to be in, for sure. And nobody, no one ever crossed him and said, you know what, I deserve to be here, I deserve to play there, or anything like that. It was just accepted,
Yeah, and you guys had an amazing team. So you tell me what it was like winning the Prentice Cup, and we could talk. This is probably our great opportunity to introduce Brad Reeson at this point, because he kind of was unquestionably the guy that led the team a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your Apprentice Cup experience, what it was like winning that.
Well, obviously, like the win was amazing, and like truly, like we knew we were going to get through. Like we just had that team. But I preface that by saying we knew because the older guys like Brad, they were all grade 13, right? So you got to keep in mind we had all gone from grade 9 and 10 all the way up to grade 12 and 13. That team never changed, right? So here we are playing with the guys that we grew up with from 8 years old to middle school to high school. So now not only you're playing with all your buddies, you're playing with guys that this is your last shot as a team with this group of guys to win this championship. And of course, the championship, the Apprentice Cup was the Ontario Championship. And you got a chance to play in the Sky Dome, which was just at the time, and the Blue Jays were just coming off those back-to-backs. So the win was amazing. Truthfully, we knew we were going to win. We were just that locked in. We were just that keyed in. But to win with your friends was the best. That was the best feeling in the world, to win with all your friends and have the kids that were in grade 13 going away. And that was it. That was the pinnacle of our career at Eastdale. And that was such a special moment for all of us that you couldn't describe it. There was no one on that team that hadn't gone through all those years of the bus rides and all that stuff. We were just so locked in as a group. We knew everything about it, and that was it.
Yeah. And you have to, I talk to people all the time about, what Brad was like as a friend, or, his best man at my wedding. But as a teammate, he had these impossibly insane moments where he would hit the ball. And in the final, from what I remember, he hit the ball back up the box. Yeah. And everything came out of the opposition at that point, including the pitcher's ability to probably have kids at this point.
Oh yeah. That was Brad, whether he did it or not, likely did. That just kind of broke that team down. You could hear it just rattle off the whole, everywhere. That really just broke that team down. Again, a guy like Brad, there was no stopping what we were going to do. And Brad led that charge, 100%. Brad led that charge from grade 10 on, right? He was the guy. We were going to follow Brad everywhere. And Brad was the guy who was going to take us there. And he did take us there, And I got a funny story about that too. So when we got there and we were doing our warm-ups in the field, I remember Brad saying, "Hey, Peters, go out to center field there and just recreate that Devon White catch. The triple play that wasn't a triple play, right?" So we were so laid back. I was yeah, man, let's do it, So I remember him telling me that, and yeah, no problem, Brad. He goes, "Just do your best impression, And we were just having a laugh. But yeah, man, that was Brad. He just one of probably the most important game of his career, again, because he was so locked in. We were all so locked in, but Brad, we were on his shoulders, the most important game of his career, and he could feel it, I think, in me, that I was kind of tightening up, and he's "Go out there and recreate that Devo White catch." I was yeah, let's do it, So that was him, Mr. Smooth, right?
Smooth until he hits the opposing pitcher in the cup and snaps it in half.
Oh yeah, but again, that's Brad.
Well, this is why I never pitched against him, I just thought, well, I can't have that happen to me. So that's a big group of that core of that Apprentice Cup team also plays in Oshawa. Do you remember what your first junior Legionnaire experience was? Were you part of the group that got called up when Gary Minix was still the coach?
Yeah, I was there for the whole Hugh Walters thing too. That was Larry, Darryl, myself, and I think it was just the three of us. Yeah, Landers was there. But Landers was an arm, right? He was going to be used as an arm. I think. Yeah. Gary used that sort of as spotty places, pitch hit and all that stuff. So yeah, I was there, and again, I was just so honored to be there, to get a call up and just be around those guys. The guys I'm talking about. Yeah. Well, they were all there. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, they were all slotted ahead of you at Eastdale, but they were kind of legendary at Eastdale too. So Derek Minix and Dan Terrio and Bobby McGreen and Jeff Pickle and Chad were kind of a group. Yeah. And the thing I remember is there was also a guy that went on to become a pretty famous hockey coach named Curtis Hodgins,
Mhm.
who also played on that team, but he's the one who gave me my nickname. He used to just say to me when I would come walking into the bullpen, he'd be like, "There's that mean old nasty polecat." Like I was some reject from Texas. And really, I was just a Catholic kid from Oshawa playing literally my second year of baseball on the Junior
Yeah.
Legionnaires.
Yeah.
And, but that stuck with me my entire life, but it was a fun bunch of guys, but it was that slot system. And we've talked a lot about this in especially those high end provincial powers like Hyde Park and North York, East York, to Oshawa. Typically, the position you were playing was always inhibited by a guy that had been around for multiple years,
Yeah.
and usually the 3 or 4 hitter on the team. So, we had Sean Nevue and a guy named Derek Minix. Derek would play a lot of shortstop and a lot of third because he had a great arm, but he would also then occasionally take a game at first. So, you're learning, right? You're learning and adjusting to these older guys that are in these positions. But it does lead us to the absolute insanity of the Hugh Walters brawl. And, do you remember where you were when that all started? Because Larry talked about being trapped out at shortstop. And look, I was right at it at home plate because we were attempting to subdue their catcher, who was a big, huge,
I remember that guy.
bound oaf guy that was going to kill us. But do you remember what you were doing when that was all going on? Because it was nuts.
Yeah, man. I know exactly where I was. So I was on the bench, obviously. I was just sitting there on the bench, and it happened, and everyone's like, "Oh, do we go? Do we go?" And so we all went. And I remember there was a guy, he was the first baseman. His name was McPherson.
Yeah.
And he was a big dude. He's a big lefty or whatever like that. And I was like, you know what? I thought to myself, like, you know what? I want to kind of make a name for myself here a little bit. So I was like, I want to kind of show these guys a little bit, like, oh, hey, he's willing to stand up for his guys or whatever like that. And I remember just kind of like there was that big scrum going on. I don't know who was in it, but I just remember kind of like just enough that he couldn't like reach me, but just enough that guys could kind of see like, oh, this kid's got a hold of someone. You know what I mean? And I remember thinking, because my best friend was his name was Sean Bryan too. So he was a pretty tough kid, and he had gone on to the NHL, and that was kind of the role he played. But in the summer times, he would always kind of like, what's the best way? I wouldn't say take it out on me, but he would always like use me as like the punching, like the dummy, right? Because he wanted to work on his like grips and all that stuff. So I remember grabbing this guy and like instantly I was like, okay, if I can hold him, you know what I mean? It's kind of twist, like he's not going to get me, but I just wanted someone to kind of like, oh, this kid's got some jam, right? Like he's kind of holding on to this guy and he's bigger and whatever. And it wasn't like I was afraid, but I was just like, all I cared about, Mike, again, was trying to be like a team guy and being like, okay, if someone just notices me, I grab this guy, then we'll be okay. And I think this kid was, or not kid, he was an older dude. And I think he kind of got what was going on. Like I was, I was a smaller guy and he knew, but it was nice of him. But I just wanted to be like, okay, at least he grabbed someone. No one wanted to be the guy that didn't grab anyone.
So politically incorrect in the year 2024, team bonding through violence. But at the time,
yeah, absolutely.
At the time,
absolutely.
It was kind of fun. But
you know what? So what's funny, Mike? Yeah. I just want to add on to that. Was the game did get canceled, right? And guys got thrown out. But you forgot we actually went back up. We continued the game for one more pitch. Well, because so many guys had gotten thrown out, I was slotted to go up. So I was pinch hitting for whoever got thrown out. And the dude just fired it right at me. And at that point, I think I knew it was coming. I was like, all right, I get it. And he just winged it at me. And I think it was Bernie McGuire, might have been the umpire. Bernie had been around for a long time. And he's like, okay, that's it. So it did go on for like one more pitch after like everything got got
I
set
remember.
up. But yeah, it was me. It was the guy he threw at me, and I knew it. Like I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna get dinged here and whatever. But that's the way we were back then, right?
I do remember the umpiring crew was Bernie and Rod Fillier. And, I'm going to pause this because Bernie McGuire, who is a legendary Oshawa player, umpire, coach, just Mr. Baseball on any number of levels, and umpired the Pan Am Games and a bunch of other things, passed away yesterday. And we want to express our condolences to his family and to everyone that was touched in Oshawa baseball by Bernie, who was easily the best umpire I've ever had the pleasure of and he was great to pitchers. He would tell you, just encourage you to keep going, and just a wonderful guy. And but I do remember it was him and Rod, and Rod was a big, kind of imposing guy. He was like, that'll be enough of this.
Yeah.
So tell me what you felt. What it was like when we got called to Eastdale and they introduced the guy who started the brawl as our new head coach. That was just the height of silliness in my estimation. But
yeah, man, that was kind of crazy, But I mean, I give Troy credit. Like, I think it takes a lot of guts to go through that, and then only a couple months later, put your name in to coach those same guys, right? To come back to Oshawa and coach those same guys. And, he had to know that he was coming sort of into like the Lions Den, right? Because like, he started that brawl. Like there's 100%. He started that whole thing. And we had played against him all year. Well, you guys had played against him, but I had seen enough of him to be like, does this guy ever not stop talking? But that was his personality, and we got to know him. And he always had his guys back, right? So to have him come in, like it really took a lot of time for him to get with the guys and all that. And to our credit, I think all the guys really accepted Troy, and they bought what he was selling, but it did take a lot of time. And Troy didn't really go, he knew, and he did kind of go out of his way to, he knew who he had to kind of win over and who he didn't. For guys like me, it didn't matter because I just want to play that summer, right? Like, but there was a lot of guys who'd gone up against him over the years, and it was just like, this guy? But, everything turned out the way it was supposed to turn out, right?
Well, and I can say this because I would have been in the most awkward position of anyone. I was super, super, super loyal to Ted Stone. Gramps was a guy that took me under his wing and, used to really look out for me. And he and Troy did not get along. So Gramps quit being the pitching coach. But, and I've pointed out some of the craziness that went with Troy. But he was also the coach when my brother went into the hospital. And, Troy was the one who came to me and said, Mike, I know it's a tough time for you. And, just show up on your start days. And you don't need to practice. I don't need to see you at any other games. And, depending on how things go with your brother, when we go to Windsor, you'll have the third game, and, away we go. And, he would phone me to see how I was doing. He would talk to me away from the team. And, I think in latter years, like with a lot of coaches, and this is the thing we forget about, is he grew into the position, and he learned as he went along, and he got better as he went along. And that guy is a true Hall of Fame guy in Oshawa baseball now for everything that he did.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, at times in these podcasts, it might seem like I'm hard on coaches because I think everyone had to live up to what Ted Stone was in my mind. And Ted was, just a wonderful coach. But the reality is that every single coach that I had, they were great. I never had the experience of being with a parent coach or one who didn't know what baseball was all about. And even if I did, they would go through a burning building for the kids. So, from that perspective, I've never had and I've never had the indignity of having poor coaching. And I've seen it. I mean, obviously, I have two daughters who played rep hockey and rep soccer. And at times I've come across poor coaching, and it really affects you. And you've had nothing but great coaches. But I want to just take this moment to kind of lay it in the line there that um, they were all great coaches in their own way.
Oh yeah.
It's just strengths. And I think Troy was easy to misinterpret because when Lutton introduced him as our new coach, I think I had to pick my job off of the parking lot at Eastdale. It's like I thought last time one of our players was beating the crap out of him against the fence at Kinsman, So
well, and you got to give Troy a lot of credit too, because he was the first guy to come into the Oshawa system from the outside. Think about that, Mike. He was the very first guy to come into the Oshawa system that wasn't from Oshawa. Every coach we had was from Oshawa. Lived in Oshawa, worked at GM, was a parent coach. Like, he was the first guy. So thinking back to it, like, now we get this Toronto dude coming in. You're like, oh man, they're going to bring that Toronto attitude, right? And there was a Toronto attitude. And like, we never ever had that. So, you gotta give Troy credit in two ways. Like, first of all, he's coming in after a brawl, which months earlier guys wanted to kill him. And two, he's throwing his name in the hat for a job on the junior team that, he's an outsider. He was the first legit outsider that came into that system. And now, his legacy is like, he's a huge cornerstone in the legacy of Oshawa baseball. I mean, he brought an inter-county team there. His sons are very involved with it now. And it's like, that took some balls, man. It definitely took some balls in two ways,
Yeah, him, Ken Babcock, who I can never say enough good things about. Ken running the program up at Durham, but also involved with Oshawa as the president of Oshawa Minor Baseball. And Jim Lutton, who has been there, I think, since the dawn of time, wearing the same umpire pants. And Lutton, I still have the funniest Jim Lutton story. And this is where Troy's brilliance as a coach comes in. We had a family day promotion at Kinsman Stadium. I don't know if you remember this, but it was where we handed out our, there was a little media guide we did.
Yes, I remember that.
So there were a few hundred people at the stadium, and I was pitching. And, one of the dynamics that I can admit now is when I would have a good game, I would get increasingly salty and angry out on the mound, because that's what I was doing, was taking all the anger and frustration out of me and projecting it onto the ball. But part of it was Fillier was behind the plate, and he kept missing calls because, he just wasn't great on the outside left edge of the plate, whereas I needed to live it there. So I kept swearing at him, and and I was dropping F-bombs like crazy, and he kept saying, that'll be enough. That'll be enough. Anyway, get out of the game. We win it. I go to, hop into the dressing room, and one of the coaches says, Lutton wants to see you behind the score booth. And, I get there, and Jim's like, yeah, I think we might have to suspend you for a couple of games. I said, why is that? He said, the amount of foul language out on the mound there, Mike. We had a young kid that was maybe 4 or 5 come and ask what the F word was because he was saying it so much. And I was like, now Troy, of course, made sure I didn't get suspended and went to Lutton and said, that's just, look at this. This is not a game for 2-year-olds, But
do you remember the time, Mike, with Lutton? I think it was myself and someone else who had some artistic ability. We drew from the grass by the pitcher's mound, just before the pitcher's mound, to the outfield grass in between first and second. We drew a life-size portrait of Jim Lutton's head, and you could probably see it from space. And everyone was walking; no one would step on it. And we were doing infield, and like everyone's just over here, and finally, like Lutton's like, "What's going on?" Everyone was laughing, and he he lost his mind. He was like, this is just disrespectful. And the worst part was, Mike, it was Fred Flintstone's head.
Yeah.
Right? So guys are taking ground balls, but no one wants to touch this big life-size portrait of his head. And all it was Fred Flintstone. I don't know who did it, but I remember we were out there just laughing. I'm like, okay, shade the eyes or do this or make the chin a little like, and whoever it was, they were out there with a fungo bat and they were just raking this thing. And no one wanted to go near it. But again, like, tons of respect for these guys, man. Because like a guy like Jim Lutton, you don't have baseball, you don't have organizations without like that foundation of guys like that. And I think as we get older and more responsible and all that, like you understand, right? So
yeah, Jim is truly, one of the greats, and with Oshawa baseball for his entire life.
Yeah.
Like he's been writing a book on the EOBA and he knows the history of everything. He knows every player. He keeps every shred of stats around. He just, as a general manager, he was fun to play for, and he would, he'd rip you if you had a bad game. I can remember the worst game I ever pitched was in High Park, and Lutton drove me there because I had to work or something. And anyway, I've never had a game this bad in my life. I gave up 9 runs in an inning, and I went straight to the shower. The funny thing was the High Park pitcher then came out in the top of the second and gave up 10 runs. So he was in the shower beside me, in the clubhouse beside me, and the two of us sat there for 8 innings saying, I don't know what the hell happened tonight. And Lutton all the way home was like, I should have just left you at work today. What the hell was that all about?
That's totally Jim. He was so serious too. I remember a couple times he had to come out and umpire, right? And I remember he was umpiring first base or whatever. And now this is guy's like our GM. He knows me. He's known me since I was like 8 years old or whatever it was. And he's got the uniform on. And I looked at him. I go, like, where'd you get that? Like, I said something about like, because it was the time 10, but like, where'd you get that out of the cryogenic chamber or something like that? And he looks at me. He goes, I will throw you right out of this game. And I was like, no, you're not. He goes, oh, yes, I will. You're being disrespectful to me. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, he's legit. Like, when he crossed those lines, like, he's the man. But, like, I remember just looking at him thinking, like, oh, my God. Like, where did you get that outfit from, right? But, he was legit, man. And I tons of respect for him. But he rolled with it.
It's, so you come out of these, really great learning tree. You learn in Oshawa. You have a great experience, playing for Sam in the Eastdale program. And I think it started with you and the Houstons. And I remember Brad had been at MAC, but wasn't playing for the MAC team yet.
Yeah.
And David Hatch all coming up to Brock with a coach named Mike Gordensky to just take a look at the indoor workouts. I think this is before Coach McRae was involved. What do you recall of your first visit to the Brock campus?
Well, again, it was just like I knew St. Catharines pretty well because my grandparents had lived there, and I'd always gone up there, and I used to do like the swimming and all that stuff in summer camp. So I knew the campus pretty well. I just, again, it was very overwhelming to me to see that many guys in a gym, but there was nothing that was like, it's a gym, right? It's a gym workout. Now keep in mind, like, you going back to Eastdale, like I've been doing those gym workouts. Like our gym workouts would start from September to our season, when our season started, which was in April or May. But in between that, we always used to go down south every year. So we were going to like Florida and Alabama. So baseball for me and guys like Brad was like, it was a year-round thing. So when we stepped into those gym workouts, it was kind of like, okay, like we've all seen this before, like that. But the amount of people that were there, like that was definitely overwhelming. But as far as pressure, there was no real pressure then. Because I mean, like you and Teddy brought us down. And it was like, it's, we're still in high school. So what does this, what does it matter? But it was very cool to kind of get that introduction to it. You know what I mean? And I think it was only one day.
It was, yeah. And we took you to the most important part of the campus, which was the pub, of course, in Isaacs.
Yeah.
Before we get there, we've kind of explained that my nickname came from Curtis Hodgins and his feeling that every time I walked out of that bullpen, I was going to bite him. Why don't we talk about how Ted the Pope Gendron got his nickname? Because I remember the exact moment that we started calling him the Pope, and it was in that year we played for Gary Minix, and we were going to Windsor for eliminations. We rented vans, and Ted was the responsible one. So he rented a van, and a bunch of us knuckleheads jumped in the back of it. But before we started on the road to Windsor, we made a stop at the beer store. So we all had, thankfully, this is not, I don't think we could do this anymore, but we all started drinking at Oshawa for the road for the drive to Windsor, and things kind of got a little out of control. I can remember Brad smashed a beer bottle over my arm for some reason and cut me open. I was bleeding all over. I had a white shirt, so it was now a red and white shirt.
Yeah.
There was tons of craziness going on, and Ted would be like, "We have a game tomorrow. Please
He'd
stop."
be like this. 10-2, right? 10-2 on the wheel.
Yeah.
Guys, we have a game tomorrow. I don't know why you're acting. And just like straight ahead, right? Just looking straight ahead. And he was just, I mean, looking back, like, yeah, rightfully so. Like, Ted was always that guy. But you know what? He's just, like, so I didn't mean to interrupt, but I know the moment you're talking about. Go ahead, sorry.
So the insanity of this is probably by the time we get to Mississauga, the seal is broken and we have to pee constantly.
Yeah.
So maybe we make it every couple of kilometers and we yell at him to pull over because we all go running out and have to pee on the side of the road. And eventually Ted has had enough and is really starting to kind of give it to us. And I think that's about the time that you're just like,
I thought, I mean, I was so young and I was like, what's something that's gonna, like, everyone's gonna get and everyone's gonna realize? So I'm like, I'm gonna go for it. I'm like, what are you, the Pope? Because like the Pope at the time was the holier than now, right? So he's like, there was no one bigger than the Pope. I'm like, who are you, the Pope, telling us what to do? And then it stuck. Like even now, like today when I saw that other, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, the Pope. But it's perfect in the way his whole aura and his whole like way he always was. And I was like, you know what? That's not even an insult for that dude because he is like he's legit like up there,
Yeah, and that team could have stood to listen to him because we lost that Saturday morning game where we had a player that had gotten into a fight with another player and was laying like a whale across the front of our dugout with a swollen face and an ice bag on his face and one on his knee. And we just came out and were horrible and immediately started the elims down a game, right? Yeah. So we have to go around the loser side of the bracket. And eventually we lost out, which to High Park, but just an absolute disgrace in terms of how we carried ourselves. But Ted was the mature one. And to say the rest of us were probably lacking in it at that point, probably true.
I think Teddy was the first guy I know who had like a man's goatee. So I was like, oh wow, like this guy, he's like wise beyond his years because he's like a man's goatee. We used to have like those bad, let's grow goatees for like the playoffs, and you look like the bad teenager. But I was like, yeah, man, that guy can grow like a goatee. He's got to be pretty knowledgeable, he's just gonna be one of these or whatever. Good dude though, man, love that.
Yeah. Guy. So that brings us to, do you remember what you signed up to take in terms of courses at Brock? And do you remember your first interaction with the coaches? Did Coach McRae reach out during the summer? I think likely, eh?
Looking back, so first of all, to answer your first question, what I always do is I'm going to be completely honest with you. I took the Rec and Leisure program, right? But up until yesterday, I used to tell everyone who asked me what I took in university or any girl I met at Isaac's or whatever, what do you take? I go, I just take phys ed. I would never want to admit that I was in the Rec and Leisure program. Ever. Right? Even to this day, like, I just took phys ed. What's that? I'm like, like gym and whatever like that. But I was like, because I was always afraid, like if someone asked me what Rec and Leisure was, I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of living it right now, so I can't really tell you. You know, so that was my introduction. I kind of knew the path that I was on anyway, so I wasn't really worried. That was the time of like just get a degree in anything and go from there. I knew I always wanted to be a fireman, so I was like, I'll get a degree, whatever. And gosh, that's where it ended up. But you know what, Mike? The only real communication, and I thought about this kind of hard because I've been listening to some of the previous podcasts. I never really had a meeting with any of the coaches, to be honest with you. Like right from, and which is fine. Maybe you know better, but I think maybe you and Ted were sort of more the conduit to that. Like we were the eastern part. So I never really had a conversation with any of the coaches, to be honest with you, prior to. And it's not like I needed that, but whatever.
No, we did some scouting and helped with the recruiting of Oshawa and some of the eastern side of the GTA. So we were very familiar, obviously, with, the Leaside Metro League at that point, and we're trying to kind of help get some of the higher end players out of that, and obviously had a pipeline from Oshawa. Mike and Jeff Lounsbury, I think, and even Briggs Jude did some, they were really quite well connected to the junior inter-county programs. And we were mostly tied to the Leaside junior program. So maybe it was one of those things where once they understood you guys were coming, that it was...
it seemed there was like a cutoff between like the Burlington Bridge or something like that. You know what I mean? Which made sense. Like we would only go past that if we were doing like tournaments or whatever like that. It's just we kind of stayed in one section, and they they had that whole Niagara Way or whatever like that, which made sense, right?
Yeah. So I think that's probably the extent of our contributions. I think Ted and I went to a couple tournaments in Guelph too, and kind of did some player evaluation. But like I said, it wasn't my strong suit. I knew who could play and who carried themselves like a player and who was a good teammate and who I hated facing. So I would give as much of that input to the coaches as possible. But yeah, they had a lot to get going on. And so that brings us to training camp and, your decision to, first off, you had the greatest location for your house in training camp because you guys were in Thorold, but you make the decision to live with the Houston boys and JJ. And Larry talks about this all the time, that, he was super pissed that you and JJ slid down a day before those guys and you claimed the basement and JJ claimed the master bedroom, and the Houstons ended up with the smaller bedrooms. Was that part of a grand plan, Chris?
Look, man, it wasn't a grand plan. I'd like to, honestly, I don't know why that happened or whatever like that. And I heard Larry talking about that. And I remember I was actually in Nashville and I was working out and I heard that come up and I just knew it. I'm like, oh man, is he going to say that? And he did. It broke my heart, man. It just broke my heart. I was like, you know what? I could see how that can be seen as a kind of a dick move or whatever. And I don't remember having that thought, but I did get the basement, but whatever. Sorry, Larry. Sorry, buddy. Sorry, buddy. But yeah, no, it was good. It was good. We had a good time for sure.
Yeah. Do you remember the first day of camp and what you were thinking when you saw it was not just 30 guys there all of a sudden. It was, I think we were back up to close to 50 to 55 guys at camp and 6 first basemen. That must have been somewhat eye-opening, I would suspect.
Well, first of all, like the first day of camp, I don't think that us newer guys really got intimidated by it because we hadn't gone through the winter workouts. And so I can only imagine showing up somewhere and being like, well, I thought these were only the guys going to show up. And then all of a sudden you get a bunch of new guys on top of that. So yeah, I could see where that'd be intimidating. You know what, Mike, I just remember, because they kind of have section things on, like, I don't remember like all the 6 guys. I remember the 4 of us or whatever like that. But, in these previous podcasts, like I, for the life of me, cannot remember those other 2 dudes. Like I just don't, I don't remember them at all. Everyone keeps saying there's these big guys, which makes me think like I just do not remember that. I remember being so stuck in my mentality and my focus or whatever like that because I knew there was competition. I knew that nobody was guaranteed a spot on that team. So really, I remember just thinking like, you just play your game, do what you can do, and stay there. But yeah, no. But to answer your question, I wasn't intimidated by the size of the guys because again, Mike, like I was coming off like consistent years of just constant baseball. So there was nothing about that camp that intimidated me until like later on. But other than that, sorry, it just kind of went on there.
No, it's all good. It was the same for me. There were only 3 left-handed pitchers in camp. So from that perspective, there wasn't like there were 6 all of a sudden, right? And so I was not intimidated by the camp. I wanted it to go smoothly. And, we've talked previously about, we got some injuries due to some craziness. But like right away, you are making pretty good relationship. I remember with Mark Kasoyan and Brian Simmons, the two kind of, I would say younger, and although Simmons had already been at the school, he came from the winter workouts, but, you guys start really making some friends on the team with the Burlington infielders.
Yeah.
Do you remember what your early interactions were with Cass and Simmons?
Man, those guys just had so much good energy and they were just so funny. They were always like encouraging guys, but everything came at a price, right? Like it always came at something. And that's sort of my personality, right? So it was almost, I remember thinking like, all right, well, if these guys are going to get me, I got to go harder on them. And we would just constantly just go harder and harder and harder on each other of, just how much we could get away with. And of course, like that forms a bond, right? Like that always forms a bond when you can, you okay there, Mike? Near me? Like with those guys, it formed a bond with us. And we were always just trying to outdo each other. There's no competition for the job or anything like that. And I remember thinking like Mark was sort of like the kid brother of Simmons there, but Cass would always try to outdo him, And I remember there's points in their relationship and with us where Simmons would always like, whoa, okay, that's good. Let's take a back seat here because of just how wild it would get. They were great guys, man. It's just awesome dudes to be around for sure.
And you have Gruchy, as he pointed out, couch surfing with you guys for a few weeks until he gets into residence. Tell me what it was like having Chris in your mix, because he's a completely different personality than Larry and Daryl or yourself, or JJ, from what I can remember. Well, maybe JJ was a little more in line with Grooch, but what was it like having Grooch around, and what kinds of things did you do to torment him?
Well, that guy walked off the set of friggin' Electric Circus, right? Like, this dude, and again, like, looking back on it, like, oh yeah, I'm competing for a job with this guy. He's like 6'6" or whatever he was. Probably 6'4", but 6'6" because at the time they like those big, thick, chunky boots that he would wear. Like the soles. I don't even know if he wore them. I don't even know if he wore them, but he fits the mold, right? Yeah. So this dude like walks off Electric Circus and he's got like the chain and all that stuff. And I was like, I love this guy, man. He's awesome because he again, like he just had this like certain energy. It was like, he's always kind of like flopping his head around and whatever. He'd be talking about like this like tech. I heard him say EDM, but dude, like there was no EDM back then. It was like techno. It was like the Stevie B stuff, and he was all into that. So yeah, man. But you know what? That's where the bonds are made. When like really we're competing for a job. And like it was just one of those things where like, yeah, man, you stay on our couch, and it was like he said, like it was a month or whatever like that. But it was just that feeling out process of everything. And he was such a good guy, right? He was such a good guy, so upbeat, so happy, and really, Mike, like a lot of guys were like that too. When you think about it in camp, when it's supposed to be so competitive, but we all sort of gelled, right?
Yeah, I think, and I've said it. The one thing I do remember was there was a pretty hard line between guys who knew what they were doing on a field and those that were not.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I at a certain point kind of got impatient because I just wanted to get down to it. And we were just trying to survive some of this stuff. I can remember um, not only would you have the punishment if you lost the inter squad game, but I remember it may have been right after the first cut down day where Mike lined a softball in the baseline, and then he blew that whistle, and you had to catch the guy in front of you. And if you got caught,
Yeah.
you had to do 50 push-ups in the middle. And that went on, and I remember thinking, this is the worst drill I've ever endured. And at that point, I was in great shape, probably one of the guys on the team that could easily handle that stuff. But I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to Ralph my guts out at the end of this, or, I don't ever want to hear another whistle in my
Yeah.
life at that point, um, I remember camp being grueling a little bit. It was grueling
Yeah.
just because of a lot of things. I was sporting a little bit of a groin injury because of being overused in the summer, where it was like everybody's favorite new toy. And Coach McRae finally had to intervene and say, that's enough. You're not pitching anymore. But I do remember that there was a real tightness with the guys. And knowing your love of uniforms, what was it like when you finally got your Brock jersey?
Man, I was white knuckling that whole time, to be honest with you. Like, it was, when I look back on that, like that training camp and all that, and of course, like the infamous, you know,
Line up the
shooting
first
lasers,
baseman?
yeah, shooting lasers at you or whatever like that. Like, after that, I felt like, how do I put this? Honestly, Mike, I didn't feel like I deserved it. Like, I didn't feel like I deserved to be there. I was grateful to be there. But I lost something in that camp. Like, there's something broke in me, I think, in that training camp. And I thought, okay, I can regroup and recover, but I was just glad to be there, right? Which is probably not the best mentality to have as a player. There was a little bit of, am I just here because of like a mic or like we came as a package, but we weren't really, I didn't, I was the one that sort of was like, I don't know, man, like it came as a package deal, but this guy was like the B movie of the two other guys that came, and I knew I had you in my corner. I wouldn't say my corner, but like, I'm sure you and Teddy had pumped my tires a bit, and we had a bit of a reputation coming in, I think. But I to say I was happy would not be the right word for it. To say I was glad to be there and I held on 100%. Like, it was, I'm not saying I wasn't proud, but I just did not have a good feeling when I made that team. And honestly, Mike, I wouldn't have been torn had I been cut, because I was like, I didn't deserve it. I just didn't feel like I deserved to really be there after that, because I don't know what it was, Mike. I don't know if it was like I was mad because I didn't show up in shape or whatever. It wasn't like it wasn't my standard of the way I wanted to be, if I could put it that way.
Yeah, having played with you 2 years prior to that in Oshawa, and I've said this about Leaside teams. Leaside teams had this way of handling first base. They'd put vets there. And I believe that Sean Neville may have been there a little bit for the year that you got called up. And then the next year when we played for Troy, you were the guy.
Yeah.
A little bit of Sully would occasionally play first.
Yeah.
But you were the guy. And when I did Jeff Lounsbury's podcast and talked about the first baseman, I genuinely got an answer that shocked me. I had never ever talked to, I always thought it was weird that we carried four of them. But I'd never talked to the coaches about it in 30 years. But Jeff said at the time that the coaches felt that you were going to be the best player out of the four of them. And I really think in your case, knowing how you're wired, that they may have gotten better out of you if they would have sat down and talked to you just like that. Said, you
Yeah.
know, you're young. We think you've got all the tools to be the best of the group here. But you know, there's some things we feel you need to learn, and more so communicated expectation. I think the hard part is they kind of kept it as an ongoing open competition, which wasn't easy
Yeah.
for anybody. And I think that's tough, you know, from that perspective. And I just remember in high school when I first became a pitcher, I didn't start playing baseball till my grade 13 year, but we had a great coach there named Paul Perron who would sit us down every month or so. Well, maybe not month, maybe it was every week, and he would just communicate to everybody what the expectations were for that week. And my very first week, he said, Mike, I would like you to go out and learn to throw in relief and just fastballs, like develop something. So my second ever outing as a pitcher, I walked 8 guys in a row against O'Neill High School. And Perron sat me down again at the start of the next week and said, Mike, this week we would like you to not walk 8 guys in a row. We would like you to maybe get a little bit better than that. And then by the time we got to the end of that high school year, you know, I didn't have any problems pitching against anybody, but it was just because he managed the communication flow all the way along.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, if there was one thing maybe to get the best out of you, it would have been that the coaches would have been communicating almost on a game by game basis what they wanted from you guys and how there was a path to get out of, instead of this open competition, how to kind of, I think they wanted performance to do it. But with you, I think you always have to talk it out a little bit.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point. I think with anything, like in any situation you're in, like, and I'm sure if you ask the other 4 guys too, like, I think and we were pretty young. So to have a role, like I understand like the win now mentality. Like I knew that they wanted to win now, but you know, you got a corner position like that. And those are supposed to be your bats, like 3, 4, 5 guys in the lineup, like, you know, placed in the lineup. And it's just like, nobody knew their role. Like nobody knew their role on the corner. Right. And everyone was looking over their shoulder. Like I get the impression, I can't speak for the other guys. I get the impression though, that you were constantly looking over your shoulder and I listened to Colin's thing too, and he had mentioned something about like really like looking over his shoulder, and it's like, I don't know if you can, like, I don't know people that can really perform like that, but to like, and I don't want to make this about me, but like I would have really appreciated just to sit down and be like, hey, look, this is going to be your role or whatever, and I was always a guy, again, like I go back to it, I was always a kid that I was in between it, right? I was always in between like the Reesons, the Sullys, the Minutes, right? So I could play a role. Like I was always a good role guy or whatever like that. But when I got the job, I was fairly proficient at it. But then I'd always age out, and then the guy in front of me would be there again, so I could always sit back. I think one of the biggest, that was definitely a detriment, I think, and it kind of goes back to your original question, was like, I just did not feel comfortable being there because I just didn't feel like I belonged, to be honest with you. And, you know, I will say this about like Chris and Jess and Colin, like during that whole time of us platooning basically together, and of course, like that kindergarten club thing, like there was never any animosity between all of us. Like we really felt like we were just kind of like, hey man, good luck. Like, you know, like I got to be ready because you might, you know, have your left shoelace untied or whatever like that, and you'll be out of the game. But there was never any animosity between any of us like that. So, you know, I again, as this goes on, I really reflect on my time there. And, you know, again, I don't want to make it seem like a negative thing or whatever, but it was a really, really tough time, I think, in my life. It really broke me a lot, you know?
Yeah.
Because of my, I just felt like I let everyone down. You know, I always put other people ahead of myself, and I really felt like I let you down. I felt like I let Teddy Gendron down. I felt like I let the Houstons down. Mike, Jeff, all those guys, you know. And I think being a young kid like that, I think I put a lot of anger. Like I was pretty angry at like, I'll admit it now, I don't care. Like I was pretty angry at like Mike McRae and Jeff and those guys, and why, I have no idea, right? right? It wasn't because I'm like, oh, you're not playing me, I deserve to play. It was just like, I just didn't understand what they were trying to do, I think, again. And that's just me, take it for what it is.
Chris, that's big. And, like, I think I will say this, even when you're having an off year, you're still one of the best teammates, I've had the pleasure of playing with, because you are a team guy at heart.
Yeah.
You're just like you're like your dad that way. Your dad was, must have learned it from Jim, because I remember when and we'll get into the season now, but I remember when we won the Oshawa tournament, your dad took all of us out for a celebratory dinner at Dines, right? Like that's your
right.
Dad was always like that. He gave us some signed Bobby Orr stuff, because your dad was very tight with Bobby Orr to help with fundraising. Like he's just always been that mentality, and that you have in spades, my friend. So that is the thing about baseball, right? Baseball is a kind of a weird sport where you're part of a team, but it comes down to also this understanding that there's an individual battle that you have, for the only people that ever live with that burden of having to look over their shoulder constantly is a pitcher, because there will be someone in the bullpen. And, I think it takes a kind of a wiring that's, with all the other things that are going on, new school, living away from home, all those kinds of things, that can be a struggle. And I think there's a softer touch that's needed for younger players who just want to feel confident and comfortable. And the nature of competition is that it's not comfortable. So they kind of run counterintuitive, right?
So when I reflect back, like, again, like, I hear all these guys talking, like, when I reflect back, like, I think to, like all that, the new school, like living on your own and all that stuff. And this is an excuse, but I mean, it all comes on me. Like, reflecting back, I really had a hard time with that, and then you had the social scene. Like, I wasn't doing the best things, man, to take care of myself, because I was on my own, like I was on my own. There was no one to govern me. And like, Mike, like really, like that was a very, very hard time for me. Again, I can't preface this enough, because not only was I wasn't, I was so bad. I was in bad shape, bad attitude, bad habits. And like, I always felt like I just didn't give enough. Like, I just did not give enough to that program. But what I could give was that sort of like, all right, I'll keep the guys loose and keep them light. And you know what I mean? Like, if I have to, like, Mike, okay, let me back up a minute. If my Brock career could be summed up in one funny story, this is it. I should have probably just hung it up then. Okay. So you know how we came in early for training camp and all that stuff. So I had gone down with a friend of mine, I had gone down to the community park, and the St. Catharines Blue Jays were still playing at the time, right? So I was like, oh, we'll go down and watch a game or whatever like that. This will be fun. It's like minor league baseball. So as we all know, the big three in the Toronto Blue Jay outfield in the 80s was who, Mike?
This is easy. Jesse Barfield in right, the shaker Lloyd Moseby in center, and George Bell in left.
So we idolized all those guys, right?
Yep.
Like, they were the big dogs. So somehow during the seventh inning, there's this promo going on of like, you can win a free pizza or whatever like that if you drive this golf ball over center field. I'm like, I get picked to do it. I'm like, this will be easy, right? We're eating free tonight. So I look over and I get the golf club and all that. And they're like, yeah, this guy's going to do it or whatever. I look over, Lloyd Moseby's over there. And he might have been like a roving coach or like a hitting instructor or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God, it's Lloyd Moseby. Like, it's Lloyd Moseby. I'm like waving at him or whatever like that. I'm like, oh, what's up? Right? But they got to hurry things along, right? So they got me lined up at home plate, and they put the ball on the tee. So I'm going to get up. And so I'm like, all right, this will be easy. So somehow someone distracted me and kind of turned me around. They're like, well, we're going to make you dizzy or whatever like that. And you got to try. I'm like, this will be no big deal. So now you got the Stomper or the Blue Jay guys watching us, and the other guys are watching us, right? Like, hurry up, get this over with. So as they're spinning me around, they put a friggin' wiffle ball on the tee, right? Now, this is Community Park, our home our home stadium that we're going to play in. Lloyd Moseby's over there, like my idol. I love this guy watching that. I go up to the tee. Literally, the thing goes 2 feet in front of me. Nobody, listen, Mike, listen. So nobody knows that this thing's well, obviously they knew it was a wiffle ball. Lloyd Moseby turns to me, he goes, "Oh my gosh, you hit the ball like a big pussy." I'm like, so not only did I embarrass myself in front of the hundreds that are watching that thing, my idol, like the guy I grew up watching, with Tom Cheek and Jerry, now he's calling me a big pussy. And that's just like, looking back on it, I should have been like, you know what? I'm never getting a hit in this park ever. Like, this guy just put a curse on me. Lloyd Moseby. It was the worst feeling in the world. And he did one of these laughs where he was like doing one of these, buddy. Then he goes, "You hit it like a pussy." So that was my start.
So I can semi-relate to this. Okay, you remember at the Oshawa Generals game, they would have that thing where you would shoot the puck.
Yep, in the middle,
from the other blue line, and you had to get it on net. But there was like a board that they would put in and a little slot, and if you put it in,
for sure,
you'd win a car. So I went to a Generals game when I had just moved to Oshawa, so I was maybe in grade 3 or 4. I went with my neighbor, and so I get the chance to shoot for a car. But the problem is, before you go out there, the game staff of the Generals were like, "There's no pressure," but a completely blind guy for the North Bay Centennials won the car, and just slid it right in. So there's no pressure at all. So you get out there, and there's 3 or 4 in the Civic at the time, 3 or 4,000 people at the game, and they give you a nice big. It was a Titan Gretzky stick,
the white one.
Yeah, the white one, and I shot it. I had never played hockey. It was nowhere. Thankfully, I hit the backboards, but probably 15 or 20 feet away from the net by the time it got down there, and the crowd gave me a polite round of applause. But the game staff screw with you on purpose. So the wiffle ball doesn't shock me because they'll say something to kind of screw you up mentally. And I didn't have. It'd been funny if Gretzky would have been there calling me a pussy for not hitting the net.
It's the same thing, right? Like, it's the same thing. Like, I was like, man, I used to have your baseball cards, and it was so embarrassing. I had like no comeback at all. I just was like, threw it up, But to have Lloyd Moseby call you a pussy like that and laugh, like it was, it echoed through there, his dying laugh, and doubled over. And oh man, I was like, this might be a sign, right? So, anyways, going back to it.
Let's touch on something else that you did that's just classic. At Nationals, you cracked out your Jeff Lounsbury imitation right in front. Lounsbury was standing right behind you when you did it, but his car had been broken into, and you launched into they stole my hacky stick and my 8-track tapes of Journey, and
well, I'm always an observer, right? Like, I always observe people, and I'll always try to kind of go over the top with it. And I was like, all right, what's this guy doing? Like, when he leaves the park here, what's he up to? Like, I always have this thing in my head, And of course, I saw the mullet and the earring and the white shoes. So I'm like, oh, dude, obviously he's a South Oshawa guy. They can't be any different than anywhere else in Niagara, right? So I remember he was being pissed, and again, like, we're in a moment where, like, there's no going back, right? Like, we're at the Nationals, and the guys are tight. It's cold, everything. Like, we've talked about it before with that weekend and all that. And I was like, you know what? Like, and there had been some, I don't want to say friction, but like he was a hard, he was hard on guys and whatever like that. But I thought, you know what? There's no going back. So I might as well just go at it, right? And so I had this picture painted in my head of what's his car look like, like how many stacks of smokes are gone, and like I picture that, like, that silver Easton that he probably just loved and taped every day. And of course he's going to have an 8-track, right? Because, he's from out there. And, Journey, there's only one thing to listen to. And I'm just going back to my South Oshawa roots, right? Where all these dudes are like that. Respect Chad Stone. I know he's going to listen to this. But, I just thought, I got to keep the boys loose because it was just one of these moments where it's like, well, there's no going back. What am I going to do? Cut? And then he walked in. I don't know if he appreciated it or not. Probably not, because it would have been that younger age of like, what's this guy doing? You know what I mean? This guy's probably, batting Manny Lee stats or whatever, and he's mocking me. But I just thought in the moment it was probably the right thing to do, and it worked. Clearly it worked. Like, all the guys got a chuckle. I was like, well, if I'm going to be the Lightning, might as well go harder, right?
Okay, well, while we're on it, you got to talk about nicknaming Gruchy the Maltese Falcon and your little song that you did.
He'd be like, Italian stallion. He's like, I'm Maltese. That's the thing. I'm like, dude, are you Italian? He's like, no, I'm Maltese. And he'd go into this big long rap about, my dad's from here. I'm like, I don't care. Like, you just look Italian, so you're Italian. You're going to be an Italian guy. And he's like, no, I'm Maltese. And so I'm like, he was always into that music. He's like, oh yeah, did you hear the new Stevie B? I'm like, come on, man, I'm from Oshawa. It's like Stevie B. And so finally we were sitting there the one day and he would always take it so offensive when I'd call him Italian. So then finally would come up and like, he's like, Italian. And then I'd come in and he's like, Maltese Falcon. Right? I'd be like, and I always add to it too, like, don't stop, Gruchy. Italian stallion. And then his voice would come ahead and he'd be like, I'm not Italian. And then, oh, sorry, you're the Maltese Falcon.
Chris, I'm crying. I'm goddamn crying here. Like, you're just, yeah.
Because I remember the moment too, because we were sitting there and he had his feet against the fence, and I'd be like, you're Italian, right? No, I'm Maltese. And I'm like, I don't even know where that is, my man. Like, you're Italian. That's just what you are. He's like, my mom's from the Italian. Oh, yeah, I don't care. You're Italian. And so then I'd always just bring in that whole, like, that Maltese part. I'd be like, I can't even pick out malt on a map. So you're just an Italian guy because you wear tight shirts and baggy jeans and you're, like, into that type of music. So that's who you are and that's who you're going to be. I love that guy, though, man. And he used to walk around with, like, his necklace on with Grooch on it. I was like, oh, I love it,
Yeah, that was a thing, too. I mean, Daryl had one that said drill, and I had a bigger one because Polecat's a lot longer, but that was kind of a thing. And we did, I mean, one thing that we can talk about is, we're just young guys still figuring it out. I remember when I was in Oshawa, I did something stupid because, now and later in life, I tell my daughters about it. The pitching staff decided we all needed to have earrings for some reason. And so, Hatch and myself, and I don't know whether Chad Stone may have been the one that was smart enough not to do this, but
Chad would have done that 100%. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was,
his would have been like a feather earring because it would have been like a rocker thing.
But I know for sure that Hatch, myself, Landers, and I'm gonna say Stephen Drews for sure.
He probably had a belly button too.
Yeah. So I went to the 5 Points Mall. And I'm like, I need an earring, a hole in my left ear, and the girl's like, okay, we'll put one in. Takes out the gun, but she does it too close to my head, so she shoots me with the gun, and it's like a geyser of blood, and I'm shooting blood all over the place. She's like, yeah, I think that one's a little too close to your ear and it's in the wrong spot. We'll have to do it again. So she jams in another one. And so I've got a big gauze pad on the side of my head. I've got 2 holes in my ear. And, 30 years later, my daughters are still like,
yeah,
look at
that's
that.
That's what we do, though, man.
I know.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the stuff we would do for our guys, right? Like our team and stuff like that. And sort of that's what it was going back to was, at that point, like, I kind of knew, like, my role on that team was just so diminished or whatever like that, to the point of, like, well, I just, again, like, I go back to it, and, like, I really, man, like there's so much more that I wanted out of myself. And I can honestly remember like just the confidence of just having no confidence. I had zero confidence. I remember one of the worst times we were playing at the community park and we were playing some dude who had like, he would throw a knuckleball and a fastball. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I got a chance to play with him. This dude throws me a knuckleball. I whiff. And then he throws me like an 85-mile-an-hour fastball. And I'm like, I just remember in my head thinking like, I'm done. Like, I've just got no jam at all. But my point is, I thought, you know what, if I could add to something here, like whatever it is, like that, I don't want to just be like, I'm out of here or whatever like that. Because I loved all those guys and I really wanted to commit to helping in whatever way I could, right? You know, where I could have gone the other way and just had a negative attitude and just been like, I'm out, you know?
So let me ask you about your relationship with Daryl Kemp then. I mean, obviously there were some things about Kemp that at the time you were, I think, he had a kind of a unique connection with the players. You guys both loved your dip, and he had a spitter cup on the front of his Cadillac, right on the, I think attached to the dashboards where he would put his spitter cup. But I would assume that he probably was the coach that you had the closest connection with, him or Briggs Jude. It would
be Daryl for sure.
Yeah.
I always used to call Daryl Roger Dorn because he reminded me of the third baseman from Major League. Like I expected him to show up to practice wearing like a sweater vest and his golf and just like, what's up? I'm here. But, of course, I didn't know about his pedigree. I just kind of found out about it through the other guys and all that, of him being a player, right? But you know what? I always like he was such a calming influence. He was more of a mental guy for me. He wasn't really a fundamentals. Like he did have the fundamentals, but I needed sort of like the mental. And I remember one of the few moments that I had success was in that Durham tournament, and he just really kind of calmed me down. And he really he was like very a Zen type of dude, right? But he also still had that style, like he had that sizzle or whatever. I really, really appreciated the work that he did with me and especially me, because like again, Mike, I really needed that. I needed some sort of guidance, and he was a guy that really stepped up, and I think he saw that, but there was only a certain amount that he could add. But I really, really respected Daryl. I'm actually looking forward to seeing him again and just kind of letting him know that, like, sort of the impact that he did have on not just my play or whatever, but the impact that just that, like, take a breath, take a step back, and just calm down. It's not that important. It's not that urgent. And, again, like I respected his style. It's just like, wow, this dude's driving a Cadillac and he's got an upper decker going in. I was like, this guy looks like Roger Dorn, So he had that swagger to him,
Yeah. So, Chris, we won't belabor, the remainder of the season. I feel that for a lot of players, just surviving and growing through that first year is their championship ring. So tell me a little bit about what happens after your 1 year at Brock in terms of where you go, in terms of your education. And, we should touch about you meeting your wife, which is kind of a key point in your life, and what drove the decision to become a firefighter.
Yeah. So anyways, like going back, you asked a question about like after that 1 year, I had every intention, Mike, of like, I really need to sort of after that year, I really needed to get like my life kind of back together. Like it wasn't the baseball. It was just, I think the whole year being on your own and doing basically just trying to survive. Like I just felt that whole year for everything was just trying to survive. And again, like I wasn't doing the best for myself. I wasn't doing the best for my body. Like I was just into all the wrong things and just going hard on all the wrong things. And, I ended up actually going on academic probation after that first year, which was just a nightmare for me. And again, that all came down to myself. It wasn't for any other reason. I just didn't know how to cope, right? I just didn't know how to cope with life. And I really wanted to repay. And have a redo on the baseball. Like that's how much, Mike, it really affected me. Like I felt like there was a debt to be paid for being there. And like you and Teddy were gone. I really felt a debt to you guys, and I felt a debt to those other core guys of like, the Colin Tylers and Andrew and Gruchy and Dixon and all those guys, because I felt like they had kind of carried me a bit. I knew the Houstons weren't going back. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to come back next year. I'm going to come back and really make a go of it. And I had gone back that summer and I'd worked with Sean Brown, and just, we went hard, man. Like, we went hard in the gym and all that. And I took a lot of weight off and it got better and better and better. But then I realized that I can't go back because of that academic probation thing. It really, and I was going to beg, like, I was going to go up to Lounsbury and be like, look, man, just look at me as a new person. Like, don't forget about last year. And, there's probably some things that I did that weren't, attitude-wise, weren't the best. And that the coaches had seen. I knew Mike was gone and whatever. And I was just going to be like, look, man, I'm playing here. I was going to go on that field. And I had heard the rumors of like, well, if you don't show up to winter ball and all that, like, you weren't going to play. But I kind of made it my mission to be like, I'm going to go back summer and get better and just become better. And I was going to show up in September or August and be like, I'm playing here. Like, what are you going to do? Like, I'll just beg whatever I need to do. But then the academic probation thing happened and it was done, right? And they had kind of moved on or whatever. And I had moved on with my career and all that. So Brock was great for me. I loved it. Again, like I said at the start of this, I knew what I always wanted to do. My friend's dad was a fireman. I kind of grew up in that environment of like, helping people and that selflessness. And again, as a teammate, like, I always wanted just kind of to step up. So again, I just wanted to finish my university career. I was probably there a lot longer than I should have because of the probation law. I was in no hurry to run out into the real world. I knew what I needed to do. So when I was at Brock, I was getting my all my stuff that I needed to become a fireman, my CPR, my DFib stuff, all that I knew. And I ended up going to a school down in Texas. It was like a subset of Texas A&M. And this was like the secret, like, oh man, if you get in here, you're guaranteed a job. And it was before all the internet and all that. So I got accepted to that in my last year at Brock, finished Brock, and ended up going down to January. It was like a 3 or 4 month course that they ran it like it was like a military academy. Like, they went hard on everything, which was good for your discipline and all that. So I ended up passing that and getting through all that stuff. And Mike, within 6 months, I was on the job, like, so I had gone right from straight to university to being on the job again, being that sort of middle guy, that in-between guy of learning from the guys above me. So I started when I was 21 or 22, and now all of a sudden I had this career. I had no real job. Like I got out of university, I went to school to A&M. I worked at a shoe store for like 2 weeks. And after that, I was like, here you go, kid, like, get on the rig and go. And you're responsible for stuff. So that was my trajectory going through and learning from guys bigger than me. And that was it, man. It was go, like, go, here you go. You got a real job. You got a job that has some sort of responsibility, a lot of responsibility. And that's where I ended up.
So did you relocate to London at that point? Was your first job with the London Fire Services, or?
Yeah, man. Yep. I ended up, that was my first job. I worked in London, but again, like, I was new, so I was still living in St. Catharines. I still have a lease on my house from university, so I stayed there. Ended up, going back and forth. So I was working a 24-hour shift. I'd get a day off, work another 24-hour shift, and I get 5 days off. So being young, I had no problem doing that commute. I was just happy to have a job. And again, I had met my wife. She was working as a barista at Starbucks. She had just started, and I was going in there constantly trying to get this blonde girl's number and all that stuff. And I had like zero game. What was I going to do? Like, I had no money, like nothing like that. And I was persistent, man. Like, I was persistent for like a year and a half. And so finally I got a number and she said yes. And like, we've been together ever since like 99 when I got on the job or whatever. And so because of her, I ended up staying in Niagara for 10 years and commuting back and forth. And again, I could do it. It wasn't a big deal. We had a young daughter and it was okay. And then the minute that my wife got pregnant with her second girl, I was like, I can't keep doing this, with the job and going back and forth. So we just moved to London, and that was it, And so,
It's
but it was a
amazing.
good, man. It was a good run for sure to go from Niagara to London and work all those years and be on that job, working with dudes that were just amazing. Like, you want to talk about the ultimate team guys, like those were the guys, right? And I was so lucky to be mentored by guys bigger than me and better than me, and hopefully carried over to when I got to that position to mentor guys. And I did a lot of cool stuff, man, like stuff that I'll never ever forget. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, my daughter's birthday, my oldest daughter, she was born in 2009, and 2 weeks after she was born, I got to deliver a baby myself on the job. Like, one of these things where I remember we got this call saying, there's a woman in labor. She okay. And the confidence I had, Mike, was through the roof. Because I'd been in the delivery room, saw my older daughter get delivered. I remember saying to the older guys, I'm like, dude, I got this. Not a big deal. Give me some towels. Make sure you got those scissors, and we'll be good to go. And they're looking at me like, what? I'm like, I was in the room 2 weeks ago. I got this. Not a big deal. Of course, there's a difference between riding to a call and then getting in the door. And I'm like, and honestly, it was like a false sense, right? So I thought, well, we'll get in and all the right people will be there. Nope, he was ready to go. And I remember just going back to that moment in the delivery room, like, okay, you know what? I talked a lot of game here. I better show up. And I did, man. I was just amazing. I'm like, okay, I had this like complete like focus going on, and I delivered this baby. It was just like a miracle moment, and everything worked out well. And I remember looking up at my buddy and being like, okay, give me those shears. And it's just like, oh my God. And I left there and I puked. I got out the door, I puked. I'm like, it was just so much going on and so much confidence. But, that's a moment I was thinking of, like, when my daughter has a birthday. I just think, wow, man, like that. And that baby came out like super small. She was a premature baby. And I went back the next day, and one of the guys going off shift had said to me, he goes, hey, I heard about that baby. And I said to him, I'm like, look, man, I don't want to know. He goes, no, because his wife had worked in the NICU in London. He goes, no, it's good. I'm like, what? Because the baby wasn't breathing when it came out. We kind of resuscitated it. That was the other thing. And I'm like, I don't want to know, because that sort of mentality you have. Like, once it's done, man, you don't bring it home with you or anything like that. And he goes, no. He goes, my wife works in a NICU, and it's all good. The baby's breathing. She's going to be healthy and all that. So I was just like, oh, what a relief, right? So it was moments like that I think I was, going back to Brock, like, man, that hardship and all the things that we had to go through. It was one of those things that made me stronger, And I'm not on here trying to pump my stats or whatever like that. It's just one of those moments that I think you go back to running those stupid wind sprints, which, by the way, Colin Tyler, rematch, let's go. You got 7 months to figure it out, because you and I are going. And, it made you tougher. It made you more resilient, right?
Well, I think puke seems to be a recurring theme in your life there, Pete. It's, I remember you throwing up after those wind sprints and thinking, well, at least
bad choices. Just, again, Mike, like, what was I thinking? Probably went out the night before, and, I had to go back, man.
You know what, Pete? Those are experiences too. I mean, I did a little bit with Rob where we were ranking our favorite, places to go out at Brock, right? So for me, I was always a smart Alex guy, but I loved Front 54 too. It was, I can remember lots of adventures with us at Front 54 and in Thorold there. And, like, that's part of the growing up process, same as the Siren was in Oshawa, going out and learning just the dynamics of guys and girls and dancing and drinking and how to handle it. And eventually you grow into it. And not all of us are ready to do it at, 18, 19, 20 years old. I perish the thought it's hard for me to see my girls off to university at 18, where I'm like, you got to at least be 19 or 20 to be able to handle this. And taking grade 13 out, I don't know whether that was the smartest decision ever made. I'm going to pivot to something a little bit more sentimental now because we've had
Yeah.
a good time. I've been crying myself to tears here, laughing. But you're father to a couple of girls, so am I.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? And they're probably reaching that age where it's going to start to get a little more prickly because they like to challenge and they like to be, girls age differently than boys do. Boys are more give them a kick in the ass, but girls are really start to become passionate about being individuals. And I know it from both of my girls. What's it like being a dad that's very involved with their education and their life, and you've taken them to a new country? How are
Yeah.
you enjoying that?
Well, Mike, like when we decided to make this move and homeschool our girls and stuff like that, like I was always again with my job, like I was always a serious guy. I took everything very serious, but I could, have a good time. But I viewed myself like when I left early and all that, like that was my job, like my responsibility, not only as a father, um, but it was going to be my responsibility basically to raise these young girls to be, for lack of a better word, I want them to be strong. I want them to be warriors. I want them to be tough. I want them to be caring and smart. And that was the role I took on. So I did a complete 180 and I buried myself in everything that, school wise for them. And Mike, I'm telling you, it's the greatest job in the world to be able to do what I do with them. I can see it pays dividends for sure with them. Um, but again, like it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge, but I find myself becoming softer in the right ways because as things change with them, um, I I found myself actually, with them going through this journey. But again, it's like my role. Again, we go back to these roles that we gotta play. My role is to protect them. My role is to guide them. Their Ange, my wife, is obviously amazing, but I have to take that responsibility all the way up through to be the guy that they want to, that they want to marry, and I take that job serious. I take it real serious. So that comes from, you know, first thing in the morning of like, okay, guys, like I don't really have to tell them as much anymore, but I try to be an example for them. If I could say like, be the person that you would want your girls to marry, right? Be that example because they're always watching and they're always listening. So that's again, not that you're asking for my advice, but be the person that you want your kids to be or follow, as a model, as a role model. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's I spend a lot of time with my girls helping to try to understand that there's a bigger picture in life. There's a world outside of the four walls that you're in at a certain point in time, and
Yeah.
to have the guts and the courage to um, be kind, be gentle.
Yeah.
Those are not popular things these days where sarcasm seems to be, mainstream, but that can be mean and hurtful to other people.
Yeah.
And I just want them to understand that, um, they'll always have a soft landing spot with me, where they can admit that they've made a mistake. Mistakes happen. We make them all, and I think being the baseball pitcher, you learn that more than anything. You give up a home run, you don't have the option of shutting it down and quitting on your teammates after you make a bad pitch. You got to come back twice as hard and twice as determined on the next person up. And that's life. Life is difficult. It has some left turns in it. And if you can't back it up and say, you know what, there's a bigger picture here and there's more at play here. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing to see how involved you are as a parent, and it's like I say, mine are a little bit older. Mine are 20 and 19, and you ain't seen
Well,
that.
and again, like it took me a while to get here too, right? Because everything we grew up with is like just hard, like athletics and all that stuff. It's like just suck it up, don't like rub some dirt on it or whatever. And then I get into a job where like I get, I'm working with guys way older than me who are just like, everything's hard. You got to go hardcore. Everything you do is hardcore, right? Like, you do a job and you don't wear your mask because you're gonna look like a pussy. It's just like it was such a male like dominated world. Like everything that we do And to have girls, like, it took me a long time to be like, to feel like the, like the girls are sensitive, right? So like, there'd be times where like, just do it or just pick that up. Don't be a sucker or whatever. And, it took, again, I'm not on here trying to tell you people how to parent or whatever like that, but like, it definitely took me a lot of time. And I, I'm softer now, right? Like I'm softer to what they do. All I want them to do, Mike, is to be good citizens. Like just be good people and be soft and be kind and stay out of this world of like the internet and all that stuff. Like I know it's there, but I think we're making a way back to this, right? To conversations and just being better people, right? Because we all know at the end of it all, we're all good people. No one ever walks out in the street and runs into people that are dicks or whatever like that. Like just we can communicate with each other, right? So that's my message.
So that'll bring us to, life outside of baseball with Brad Reeson. And, I make no bones about it. I have all the time in the world for going down Brad memory lane because we did a lot of different things together. I was always a counterpoint to him. He was a little bit of a conservative guy. Most people don't understand that. He could have a good time and all that stuff, but you'd have to sometimes pull him out of his shell a little bit. And, particularly as he got settled into teaching and was, so involved with a lot of things going on in Dunbarton. And then he gets colon cancer out of nowhere. And I think all of us would, if we had to vote, the person least likely, because he monitored his health from an early age, was always in great shape, didn't seem to have a lot of external stressors and stuff. Tell me about your last couple interactions with Brad and just how that sat with you emotionally, because I think it was very significant for a lot of us.
Yeah, well, first of all, the age thing, right? Like we were still at that age where like that doesn't happen to guys like us at this age or whatever. Like I'd see Brad once in a while, just when I go back to Oshawa, just we'd always make a point to see him and stuff like that. Because my mom had still lived in Oshawa. Then my parents moved out of Oshawa; they moved up to London, and so really, like, I didn't have that much interaction with Brad as well, clearly as much as we'd like to. Which again, we all say in these moments, right? So be smarter about that. But when we did get together, it was the same Brad, right? So I think when I found out about it, I was like, man, that's a setback for him. But he's the type of guy he'll be okay, right? Like he'll be okay. He's got the odds are in his favor. He's young, he's healthy, and what really threw me off though, Mike, was near the end, right? Clearly, Brad had kept everything close to the vest with everyone other than the people closest to him, you being one of them. I didn't know how bad it was. Like, I just did not know how bad it was. It was one of those things where I heard he kind of gotten out of it and through the woods and all that. And then almost like overnight, and I've heard you say on here, like, it just went downhill. And I don't want to say it was a tough time for me, but like to see someone like that in your age group and the way he was it was really, really tough, and to know his parents and to know his brothers. And it was just, I don't know, man, like, oh man, it was so hard to see a guy like Brad go down because he wasn't the guy, right? Like, he wasn't the guy that was going to happen to. But that said, I did luckily have, going back to your original question, I did have my moment with him at the end because I was in Oshawa. It was a high school reunion. Now, Brad had kept it so close to the vest that prior to me driving down to London, I texted him and said, like, hey, man, I'm going to pick you up on Friday night. We're going to go out. And he never responded. And it was getting closer to Friday. And I texted him again. And he finally sent me a text, and I still have it. And he said, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm in the hospital and I'm not getting out. And I was just like, gosh, what a heart punch that was. So obviously I made a point of going to see him in Oshawa. I forget the name of the hospital, Sunningdale or whatever. And man, it was just, it was a moment, right, that it really stopped me in my tracks, because I was like, are we going too hard here in life? Like, what are we doing? Like, we need to really stop and look at the way we're living our lives and doing all this stuff. And it was tough, but I don't know, Mike. I get pretty choked up about it right now, and I hear the stories about Brad was everything that you hear about Brad as an athlete. Forget that everything you hear is about Brad as a person. Multiply that by 1,000,000, because that's who Brad was. Like, that's who Brad was. He was the kindest, gentlest, funniest, smartest, best guy you could ever meet. Conservative, yes. Routine, yes. But, like, that's the guy you wanted. That's a lifelong friend right there, Brad Reeson, right? There's nothing more you can say about him. You know what I mean?
I could talk for hours about it, but what I
And,
will...
sorry, Mike, to interrupt you. Like, and to grow up with him, all through the years, from like 7, 8 years old, like, the dude never changed. He was always that steady influence. He was that steady player. He was that steady person that you could always go back to and be like, at least we can go in the basement at the Reeson house, and you knew you were going to get. It was just that steadiness all the way. The ultimate team guy in life.
Yeah, I'll have more to share later down the road about this, but I just a perfect capture of what kind of a guy Brad was. He and his parents picked me up when my own brother was in the hospital at Sunnybrook. So my brother's laying in a coma in Sunnybrook and fading away. And we had to go to a game in North York. And it was a day after my brother's eyes had opened for the first time. So when you have a coma victim, there's 12 stages of coma recovery. My brother never made it past stage 8, I don't think. But stage 10, I think, is their eyes open, but there's nothing there. I can't describe to anyone that has never experienced this what it is like to look into someone's eyes and see a dead person.
Yeah, I've seen it many times, Mike. I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about.
So I physically vomited that day, and the very next day I had to pitch a game. So Brad and his parents came and they got me, and went out, pitched a game, hopped in the van, and on the way back, he just put his arm on my shoulder and said to me, Mike, and he very rarely called me Mike. He would always call me by my nickname, but he said to me, Mike, if your brother doesn't make it, I'll be your brother. He didn't need to do that. He has 2 brothers of his own. But I'll never forget that as long as I live. And that was the way he was with other people's kids. That is the way that he is with other people's brothers or sisters. He just becomes, he's like a Santa Claus, but one that was in shape, that you always wanted hanging around. He was amazing that way. And I think for all of us, there's a cautionary tale here. I asked Brad about
Hold
2
on,
months.
Mike. I just gotta say, I think someone's cutting onions in this room here, because it's getting a little teary-eyed in here, dude. Man, that's what, man. That's Brad. I can't. Yeah. Anyways,
I asked him I'd spent a couple of nights with him, stayed there all night, and I said to him, Brad, you're the healthiest guy I know. How the hell did you end up with cancer?
yeah.
And he said to me, Mike, it's pretty simple. It's anxiety and stress. And, we're at a very tipping point age for guys between 45 and 60. I've said this on other podcasts where, mental illness is a real thing. Coping with stress is a real thing. Coping with anxiety is a real thing, because men also experience a drop in testosterone at this point.
Yep.
And they go through other things that are common in and around 50. Job loss, divorce, a few things like that. And it's hard. You only have so many, reset buttons on your life. And, what Brad has taught me more than anything, and he was a teacher, so he's taught people a lot of different things, but what he's taught me is that check in on your friends, check in on each other. And it's okay to mess up. Life has got so much support, but we're guys, and guys are kind of programmed to figure it out on our own. And sometimes we need help or reconnect with a friend. So for me, he would love the fact that we're all kind of reconvening after 30 years, because, that is maybe the last gift that life gave Brad on the way out was, I remember all the parade of people that came to visit him at the hospital, because Simon and Jay and I were being traffic cop for a lot of it. One of the funniest things, and I'm hopefully Roger and Jane don't kill me for this, but when Brad went in the second time, they invited all three of his ex-girlfriends on the same day to come visit him. So it was like, okay, we've got to shuffle one in and keep the other two out of sight here. Yeah. So, but I think, we all touched each other's lives 30 years ago. There's no reason why we can't today continue it. Because when we have conversations and we connect, it's like 30 years didn't exist. Pete, you look exactly, I don't know how you do it, but, I think, lifestyle might have something to do with it, but you look exactly the goddamn same. And, I say that about a lot of the guys, but we all have that familiarity and that connection. And, for once, because I've seen, Coach McRae always looks super young. Well, he's got a little touch of gray. You'll be able to flex in front of him and go, I don't quite have that yet, baby. So, but
there's no Grecian in there either.
But I think, it's a real lesson to be learned from the Brads and just life, where, we all have been through this experience, and we're all at the core. It might be buried under some dust. It might be buried under life. We're all still friends because we were in a foxhole together. And, I want everyone to know that we still have, our hands are still there to grab onto,
Well, Mike, I want to go back to something you said about Brad, and I knew it was the stress and anxiety, and he recognized that as well. Now, how do I say this? I fully 100% agree. That's exactly what it was. And I've heard you talking on here a couple times with like mental health and all that. And I don't want to stand on my soapbox here, but over the last 3 years, I've lost 7 guys in it, whether for various reasons, but you can kind of figure it out. Health related, everything else, right? 7 guys, mostly for my job. And I think what we really need to do as men, and you're right, and I've thought about this a lot, right? Like I agree with everything you're saying. We really need to slow down and take a step back. And I think really, if you're feeling this way, if you have that feeling of something's off, I think if anyone's listening, the teammates or whatever, you really need to take a step back and really talk to someone, not just talk about talking to someone, because I think we've given this whole thing kind of lip service of like we have the bell, let's talk and all that stuff. Like, we're dudes, we're not going to do that. Right. I think it's really important. I think that we come back to doing this, right, and having these conversations and realizing that we all sort of go through the different trials and tribulations of life. You might be different than me, right? Or I might be different than the next guy. But you know what? We all have the same compounding pressures, and we're all not living in a perfect world and all that. And it's just because of these things. This is what happens. Like the stress and the anxiety and all that stuff. Like they're dirty words for our generation. Like, right? Like stress, suck it up and just do something else. We really need to do a better job, I think, of doing this. And over the years, I've realized that because, like I said, I've lost 7 guys, man. Like 7 people that I've worked with and, shared rooms with and shared meals with, like in various ways. Like they're gone, and they never had a chance really to fulfill whatever goals and dreams that they wanted to do. So, like my plea is like, guys, listen, we got to take care of ourselves. We got to start taking care of our bodies. We got to start take care of our minds. We got to start taking care of our relationships, because I look at it as like almost like as a milkshake, right? Like, so this stuff gets thrown in there and it gets mixed up. And the next thing you know, we're just like, what are we doing? Like there's a sense of like, where are we? We get lost, right? And we're not supposed to get lost, but we do, right? We do.
It's a pretty old cliche, but guys who get lost don't ask for directions.
No, and again, Mike, like, he's come up before in this podcast, right? The guy that we played with, Mike Landers. What? It's ridiculous that, not to take any sort of like ownership of it or responsibility of it, but man, like, it can happen. It can happen to you. It can happen to me. It can happen to anyone. And you're right. Like, that's why I think, really appreciate you bringing these guys back together, because if something, we can talk about our lives and how fun it's been and all that stuff, but we're in the moment now. We're here where we are now. We have to take care of each other now, right? And we don't have all the answers, but I think the collective of us can probably put that puzzle together. And I'm not a cliche guy, believe me. I'm not just saying this because I read it off of some website, but I've gone through it, I've seen it, and I know guys have gone through it, and I've helped guys that have gone through it. And one of the things that my goal now is to kind of bring that community back to just doing the basics and getting back to zero and resetting. And that's my goal now. Like, that's my journey. That's my quest, is to bring guys who have gone through it, in my profession, and really bring them back down to zero and restart and be like, guys, like, we can manage this, right? We can manage this with mental, physical, diet, all that stuff. Like, we can get through it, because I know we can, So anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just kind of went on a tangent there.
No, it's we're teammates forever. That is one thing I will always say about this group. I still have some of those teammates forever from our Oshawa days. I still, like it, but this rock group, we need to be teammates forever, because there's so limited opportunities in life to get to know people at that core level. And I like to poke fun at some of the antics and that kind of stuff, but this is more of a serious thing when it's tied to, I genuinely miss and would love to know what some of our teammates have been up to for 30 years, and even the ones that I had a couple that I may not have had the rosiest relationship with at the time. But other ones I have, I've had an ongoing relationship with Teddy and Rob Green and a few others, the Houston boys, we've all continued to cross paths, but, as our kids get a little bit older and life starts to settle in a little bit, we understand that there's value in a teammate. And I'd love to know how Ron Strow is doing. I'd love to know what Brad Tupper is up to, because, there's a togetherness that's always been there. And, we see it with even the toughest of all of us, right? Coach McRae went through the loss of his wife, and, that I know that still sits right next to his heart. And maybe the best thing is that I never got the chance to say thank you to Mike, right?
Yeah.
Like we were too busy moving on to, at that time, trying to run the league, and Ted and I just in a whirlwind. And these types of podcasts, these types of reunions, getting together as a group, again, hopefully means that we never come apart again. If that
Yeah,
makes
I mean,
sense.
there's so many things I've learned. Like I remember you and I had done that first one, and it didn't work out with the audio or whatever like that. And I'm glad it didn't work out because you know what? Like I kind of came into it with an attitude of just sort of like I'm just going to tell you what I remember. But then when I hear these other guys talking and stuff, I'm like, it kind of like it stirred up a lot of emotions and like it really made me go deeper, and not just like come on here and tell a funny story or whatever, but the meaning for like, one of the other things too, again, is I feel really bad, but like you've had a couple guys that I don't even remember because I was so in my head and I was so in my world that like I was, like I said, like that white knuckle feeling of just being like, I just want to survive tomorrow. I don't want to get kicked off this team. I don't want McRae to pull me. I don't want Lounsbury to yell at me. Like I don't want that. So I was so in my own head, and I had a couple guys, like my core guys or whatever like that I don't even remember them. Like I don't even remember them, and that to me is pretty much that's embarrassing to say, right? Because like I remember all my teammates when things were good and everything else, but it's just a moment in time where I'm like, I just do not remember that guy. And, again, it just shows you where I was at and in my life, But my point is, I'm so glad that these stories are coming out because on a personal level, it's jogging my memory. And it's like, you're right. Like what you said was like, we are teammates. We can help each other or whatever like that, right?
Well, Chris, on this team, you get to bat cleanup and are in there every day leading the kindergarten club because no one sits.
Yeah,
And
thanks for sending those stats out too. That was great. Yeah, I looked at that before I went to bed, and I'm like, I couldn't, I was like, I shouldn't do this. And I looked at that, and now I'm starting to go over like every at bat that I had, and I was just like, what a nightmare.
well,
What a nightmare. I'm just kidding, man. It's all good.
for years and years and years, I like to tell everyone I had an ERA under two, but the reality is when you go and you adjust it, the problem, the calculation is you have to multiply ERA by 9 innings, even if you're only playing 7 inning games. And the multiplication was done at 7. Now I'm not a math major, but I played enough, and all over Ontario and in the States after Brock to know how to calculate ERA. So now everyone's jumps up a bit, and Hall of Fame numbers don't look quite as Hall of Fame after a certain point. But the reality is this, and I'll say this from a competitive standpoint. The team was highly successful, and it set a foundation for a program that exists to this day. It still produces quality graduates, people who are difference makers in life. And it's not going to matter how many times you struck out or how many wins you had or any of those kinds of things. The championship rings for programs that are under 3 years is just surviving and thriving. And this is a championship team through and through because of how people have come through and been difference makers in life. And Chris, you do that every day with your girls. You're brightening the beaches of Florida. I'm sure that has Jimmy zipped down and bought you a convertible yet? Like he used to zip around the stadium in a red convertible, and we were all like, I want to be Mr. Peters.
So the last time you and I did this, I had to leave early because I had to go pick him up from the airport. He always used to carve me about having like alligator arms, right? Like short arms, deep pockets. And I think, like I was saying, I've got another rental. And I mean, it's tough to charge your parents rent or whatever, right? But it's a business. Like the guy gets the $4 discount. It's like he's living at, he comes down here. He's constantly down here. He'll find a million ways to come down here, which I don't blame him in the wintertime and all that. But yeah, like, pigeons for some gas or something at least once. But I mean, he's my dad and he's taken me all this way and he's done all the things, but
I remember the odd time he'd let you use his convertible red vet.
Yeah.
And we would go to road games in that bad boy. That was hell on wheels, baby.
Yeah, man, I felt like Sonny Crockett in that thing, but
Well, listen, Chris, I am really looking forward to seeing you before the 8th. We'll get together before the 8 months is up.
Are
Fully
you gonna pay for my travel, or is that on me? Because I got to come in from down here, man.
This just sounds like a road trip waiting to happen. I think there's a few other, like Mike Gilroy's in Tennessee somewhere, and then Coach McRae is in West Virginia. Like, I think we should just rent you a van so it feels like the 1995 season.
Yeah.
And you can load it up Briggs Jude style and just pick people up on your way up to St. Catharines and drive it, baby.
I can't wait, man. Honestly, I can't wait to see some of the guys. Like, like I said, I know you want to get going here, but I just want to say again, like, thank you to you. It's so great to see, like, Colin Tyler and Grooch and Dixon, and because we had that little, we had that corner, right? And like, I remember guys like Tinish, and I remember handcuffing Tinish one time at some bar, and it's just bringing up so many good memories of a time that, again, was like probably one of the lowest moments for me, but that all supersedes it. And I just want to, like, I'm so glad to see all, I don't know who you have coming out on here, but like, doing this really brightens my day, man. So I just want to really thank you for doing it. And I hope that everyone gets involved and has a good time, because the feeling that this really brings up is super cool, dude. And I love it.
Yeah, I have the second Mac cast I'm doing with Todd Huther from the McMaster team, and that's been interesting for me to learn that their founder died a couple of years after.
Yeah.
And they have some extra, but Billy Newton was an old teammate of mine, and just a classic. I think he set a modern record for F-bombs in a podcast. But I also have Coach Kemp and Ryan Thompson. So, doing Coach Kemp, and that'll be very interesting. His son pitches at Brock as a pitcher, of all things. And Ryan Thompson, where we'll talk obviously about, his vocal cords and his inability to yell cut. So, but Ryan, I think, is a guy that came back to the team after a year off. So interesting. He's a fireman like you are. So, I think I'm looking forward to seeing everyone, because Ryan is the one guy that I totally forgot, drew a blank on that he was on the team. It was like, I could name everybody. But, the reality is, now that I've started thinking about Ryan, I remember lots of moments with him, because he was kind of a quiet guy, but I would go out of my way to speak to the quiet guys. And I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to, we're going to get Kasoyan, and we'll get Scott Juziak and some of the very, unique characters. But I think by the time it's all done, I think all of us will be looking forward to getting together. So, Chris.
Yeah. Well, one more thing, Mike. I just want to, again, you brought something up there. Like, I just wanted to thank, because like you said, I never, like, once it was over, it was over. As you get older, like, I really appreciated the work and the time. You don't see that. You don't care about that when you're young, right? Like, I just wanted to thank, like, Mike again, McRae, and Jeff Lounsbury, and Wayne, and Daryl. Like, if they hear this or they see this, like, just know that, you probably all forgot and couldn't remember my name or whatever like that. But, there was, I left with something from each one of you guys that, to this day I brought with me, whether big, small, whatever. Like, people like you has always touched in some way. I brought something that you've given and you volunteered for your time or whatever. Like, it's got me to where I am today. So I just wanted to make sure that they knew that, so yeah. And you too, Mike, like, of course.
Well, there's only one thing left to do, Pete. After the podcast is over, you need to go puke in the nearest toilet. So, my friend, I love you.
Yeah,
we'll see you soon.
Yeah, for sure, man. You take care, okay?
Okay, bye-bye.
See you, bye.